and welcome everyone to episode 2 of the Lost Teams podcast. I'm your co-host, Anthony Ciardelli. Joining me today is the co-creator of our podcast, Andrew Lennox. Andrew, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you doing, Anthony?
Doing well. Excited to get this thing underway. I'm going to talk a little bit of basketball, which has a little bit of a relation to hockey, and you're going to talk football, right? The CFL, right?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to be covering a team in the Canadian Football League. Well, a former team, I should say.
That sounds pretty interesting. And I know they have kind of had an effect on basically the NFL coming back to Baltimore, right?
Yes, definitely. Basically, this team, they were, when they actually shut things down, were called the Baltimore Stallions. And they were averaging 30,000 fans a game. So
that's
while
pretty
they
cool.
were in the CFL. Yeah. And then, the NFL thought they could come back.
Yeah, I had no idea the CFL even had American teams, but we will.
I don't think anyone does.
We'll get to that in a bit. I'll start off. I'm going to tell everyone today about the Toronto Huskies, which was one of the first NBA teams, tracing all the way back to 1946, I believe, which is a long time ago. So,
I think basketball was created or started in Canada.
Yes, sort of.
James Naismith.
Yeah, Naismith. I think the first game was played in Massachusetts.
I see.
When he got into, he's teaching a gym class. I think the story was he was teaching a gym class and it was raining outside. They needed something to do to get his energy out. So they put a couple peach boxes up against like a raised track. This is what I found on Wikipedia. And
always reliable.
Yeah, they didn't have any holes in the box, so they just have to retrieve the ball. Eventually, they punched holes in the box, and the ball would come out the bottom, and that's basically the early iteration of basketball, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll get started with the Huskies. The Toronto Huskies started off, actually, their roots trace to hockey, which is pretty cool. I had no idea that the entire league, the entire NBA, actually spawned out of ownership of NHL teams who were looking to fill their arenas on nights when their teams weren't playing. Which blows my mind considering how much more popular the NBA is now than the NHL. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, that is crazy.
And in the case of the Toronto Huskies, they were first founded in 1946 when another very familiar hockey name, Frank J. Selke, was representing the Toronto Maple Leafs at a meeting of NHL owners who were looking to start a professional basketball league. Basketball was pretty young.
It all ties in.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's smart, but I think it's pretty funny that hockey ultimately created their main competitor. So basketball was pretty young as a sport back then. It had been around for maybe about 50 years, a little more. James Naismith, since James Naismith first organized the game in his gym class in 1891 was when the first official game was played. Pro basketball up until that point was relatively unorganized. There had been different leagues, including one called the NBL, which I think stands for the National Basketball League. But it was like if you've heard about a lot of the major sports leagues back in their early days, like baseball and hockey, there were a bunch of different leagues kind of competing for supremacy. There wasn't a union or anything like that that was as powerful as they are today for the players' unions. The owners were a lot more unscrupulous. It was just
a lot of power they held over these players in all the leagues.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it was kind of the Wild West. So what those hockey owners did, they tried to start basically a league that would play in major arenas. Up until that point, games had been played in gymnasiums and like VFWs and churches and stuff like that. So this is like coming out of the woodwork and onto the big stage. So 1946, Conn Smythe sends Frank J. Selke to this meeting. They end up deciding to award Toronto a team in the new Basketball Association of America called the BAA. Basically, 1946, and Selke and Smythe didn't own the team. They were just kind of the representatives. The team was actually owned by, let's see here. The names were Eric Graddick, who was also the co-owner of a football team called the Montreal Alouettes back then, but it wasn't the same Alouettes. It was just a precursor to.
Wow, we'll have a huge tie-in to
yeah.
what I'm going to be talking about later. That's crazy. You brought the Alouettes up.
Yeah, it's weird. All this, there's going to be some more small world stuff coming up in towards the end, but also Harold Shannon and Ben Newman. So those were the owners of the newfound Toronto Huskies. They played their first game. And before I keep going, I'm going to cite my sources. An NBAHoopsOnline.com article, which was written by a gentleman by the name of, did I even find it written down? Nope. But you can find it at NBAHoopsOnline.com /articles/firstgame.html. So that's where you can find that. Whoever wrote that, props to you. Very good job. And then we've got the Canadian Encyclopedia.ca, which is like a basically Canada Wikipedia type thing. So, and then one old article that I found in the archives called Queen City Cagers set for pro debut. Toronto Huskies open 60-game schedule with New York club tomorrow. And that was October 31st, 1946. So on November 1st, 1946, the Huskies played the very first game in NBA history against who else but the New York Knicks. So pretty cool piece of bar trivia once we get back to the bars where you can ask what teams played the first ever NBA game. And it's kind of an interesting situation because the BAA, basically the NBA claims the BAA as part of its history, but not the NBL. So basically the BAA and the NBL merged in 1949 to become what's now known as the NBA. But the BAA was still technically the NBA back before that happened.
Okay. One thing I found interesting is with, the Toronto Huskies playing in the first NBA game, why it took so long for the NBA to get back to Canada. They didn't have teams until the 90s, I guess, because hockey just took over. But
yeah, I couldn't figure that out either. That was an interesting question. You might there are going to be some quotes coming up where you might understand maybe Canadians didn't warm up too much to the sport of basketball just because they were so used to hockey already.
Right.
But the roster for the Huskies had a pretty interesting makeup. There were a few former pro players who had played in the NBL. It was their player coach, Ed Sadowski, who was 6'5", 250 pounds, a big boy. Charlie Hoffer, Mike McCarron, Bob Fitzgerald, and Dick Fitzgerald had all played some form of professional basketball before. They also had some college players, George Nostrand, who was the tallest player on the team, Harry Miller, who had played at the University of Wyoming and Seton Hall, Frank Fucarino, and Hank Biasetti. So that was their roster, pretty much half and half, former pros and college players. I believe Sadowski played at Seton Hall too, which is interesting just thinking about like where the players came from. Seton Hall is still a basketball school. It was all the way back 60, 70 years ago.
University of Wyoming is not known as a basketball school, though. So
no, it is not.
That's interesting.
I'm sure
he went to Seton Hall also. It looks like Harry Miller. So
yeah. Okay. So it was a kind of an interesting makeup. And also another CFL tie-in, a gentleman named Joe Kroll, who was a star for the Toronto Argonauts, worked out for the Huskies, but didn't end up making the team. So they almost had a cross, one of the earlier, well, not earlier because of Jim Thorpe, but a crossover athlete.
The Bo Jackson of their time.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yep. So players were paid $5,000 per season, which is equal to roughly $65,000 today, which is not that bad. I mean, 65 grand is not too shabby, even in today's.
Yeah, I mean, today it's a livable wage, no question.
I don't know if that was Canadian dollars or not. Couldn't figure that out, but if it's American dollars, pretty good.
Right.
Ed Sadowski was their player coach, like I mentioned. He would be go on to become an all-star playing for the Philadelphia Warriors. He also played for the Celtics later in his career. And he played, like I said, in the NBL before joining the Huskies. So he was really their marquee player. And he didn't last there very long. You'll find out in a little bit. So the first game takes place November 1st at Maple Leaf Gardens. So not only is the first NBA game feature a Canadian team, it's played in Canada. Which is pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really is.
It featured the Huskies taking on the Knicks. The Knicks obviously are still in existence, although many of their fans probably wish they wouldn't be, considering they stink so bad.
If If they weren't in New York City, that team might have folded up shop by now.
They had a gimmick for the first game, which was if you were taller than their tallest player, which was Nostrand at 6'8", you could go to the game for free. There were 7,000 spectators in Maple Leaf Gardens, and the Knicks won by 2 points, 68-66.
Low scoring.
Yeah, low scoring.
Compared to these days.
Yeah, this might be a reason, though. Back then, so they still apparently had a similar system for converting ice hockey rinks to basketball arenas. So, but they hadn't really perfected the putting the hardwood on top of the ice, so there was a lot of condensation built up, which made the floor slippery. You can
man.
Yeah, if you look back at pictures from back in that era, you can see the boards are still up. They didn't take down the hockey boards, so
guys must have been breaking ankles left and right.
Yeah, so you can see why the score might not be as high as it is today. Also, today defense doesn't exist in the NBA. So
that's true.
But despite the promotions and the first ever NBA game didn't really create much of a buzz in Canada. So much so that when the Knicks arrived at the Canadian border to go to Toronto, no one seemed to know who they were. This is a story. I'm reading the quote directly from one of the articles I had referenced. In a story retold by Sam Goldaper in NBA Encyclopedia, the Knicks were met by Canadian customs officials at the border who eyed the collection of abnormally tall men and asked, "What are you?" This is so funny. That's like a quote from a really terrible Terminator movie that came out, what was it, 10, 12 years ago.
Arnold?
No, Christian Bale is the Christian Bale one.
Oh, okay.
He sees Sam Worthington's character coming out of a river, and it's like just very weird, forced scene. This isn't a movie podcast, but if you've ever seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about.
Definitely haven't seen that Terminator.
No, it's not very good.
Didn't know that Terminator existed, but.
So the Knicks' Ozzie Shechtman scored the game's first basket and the first basket in NBA league history. Back then, the rules were a little different. There was no 3-point line. There was no shot clock. So, I mean, certainly a lot has changed.
Did they shoot underhand free throws on? For sure.
I bet they did. I'm sure. Yeah. I wonder, that would be something I also didn't bother to look up.
I think that there's no question on that.
Granny style.
Yeah.
There's another quote from Knicks captain Sonny Hertzberg. It was interesting playing before Canadians, recalled Knicks captain Sonny Hertzberg. The fans really didn't understand the game at first. To them, a jump ball was like a face-off in hockey, but they started to catch on and seemed to like the action. So, I mean, I can't blame them. With hockey as a reference point, I can't say I would watch a lot of basketball, but I don't.
Yeah.
But it's still pretty interesting.
It's interesting to me, though, that the games were both sports were so young in creation at that time. Like that, I don't know. I'm surprised basketball just, not because hockey took over, but it's so popular in Canada. But I'm just surprised that they didn't find a footing in Canada at all at that time.
Yeah. You would think just it's such an untapped market theoretically that it would have worked out better. But also the NBA at the time, you think about when they expanded into Canada back in the 90s, like the NBA didn't become a global brand and a huge thing until Michael Jordan. Like that's when it really exploded. It was popular in America, but like,
right.
I think that's probably why. Like it came from very, I guess you'll call it humble beginnings, where it was played in like I said, gyms and veteran foreign war places and churches, and like it came to big stadiums, but it wasn't this global brand like it is today.
Right. And to be honest, it didn't really take off in Canada in the 90s either. I mean, one of the teams moved to Memphis.
Yeah.
And if Vince Carter didn't play in Toronto, who knows how the Raptors would be right now.
And who knows what they'd be called. I'm going to get to that at the end as well. There's definitely there's some tie-in, but there is certainly, like I said, some unsuccessful basketball played in their only year of existence. They folded after their first season, in which they finished 22-38, tied for last place with the Boston Celtics, that a team whose fortunes would turn around very quickly in the NBA after that. Yeah. The Huskies lost $100,000 in their only season, all of its owners' money, so they folded. But in the just single year of existence, there was a lot of crossover into different sports and a lot of kind of interesting historical facts that you might not know about a team that only existed for a year. The first one is that Sadowski, the star player and player coach, left the team after 3 weeks because he didn't get along. It sounded like the players kind of didn't get along. There, one of the articles I read, there said there were a bunch of cliques that formed on the team, and Sadowski left. So they had to look for a new coach. That new coach not only has connections to my hometown and my childhood, but also connections to Major League Baseball and college basketball. So the Huskies hired a gentleman named Red Rolfe as their new coach. Rolfe is from Pennacook, New Hampshire, played baseball at Dartmouth, in my hometown of Hanover.
Right.
Then he played for the Yankees. He won at least one World Series with the Yankees. After his baseball career, he coached basketball at Yale before being hired as the replacement coach for Sadowski on the Huskies. So
interesting.
Yeah, crazy. So then he later went back after that and coached the Detroit Tigers, and then worked as Dartmouth's athletic director. And the baseball field that the Dartmouth baseball field is named Red Rolfe Field, and that's where I used to go baseball camp when I was a little kid. So
quite the connection.
Yeah, I've always wondered why it was called Red. I always thought it was funny as a kid, like Red Rolfe. I was like,
he
I
may
got
be
a
a
Rolfe.
distant relative.
No, not a. Yeah, I mean, it's German, but I don't think he's one of my. I think Rolfe is a German last name, but he's certainly not related to me. But still, like Red Rolfe Field just sounded funny to me. But knowing
That's
that,
cool.
I mean, that's in New Hampshire history. You don't hear a lot about Red Rolfe, but that's a pretty baller resume, if I say so myself. World Series champion, Major League Baseball player, professional basketball coach of the first team in NBA history, one of the first teams. Like, it's pretty cool. And it kind of also, it was kind of like the previous episode that I talked about, the Blades, where a team that had such a short history included someone so legendary and impactful in the world of sports. Like I told you, the Blades had Willie O'Ree, who broke the NHL's color barrier. So it's interesting how these teams can have such a short lifespan, but really have personalities on their rosters or coaching them that are just so legendary.
Yeah, and they seem, and just how they shaped even the current landscape.
Absolutely. And that current landscape was definitely shaped by the Toronto Huskies. So when the Toronto Raptors came back to the NBA, what was that, 96, 95? 95.
Yeah, I believe so.
So they were called the Raptors. They got a lot of crap for their little Raptor logo and their dinosaur. And I mean, without Vince Carter, like you said, they might not be around today either. 2009, they wore the Huskies throwback jersey, which was it was like a blue jersey, just said Toronto on it, I think. And they wore it again 2013, I think. And there was actually I found the website. There was an online campaign called Bring Back the Huskies. So they wanted to change the Raptors name to the Huskies, back then. And even when I think the team was invented, that was one of the names they were considering.
Sure. No chance of that happening now.
Now that they've won a title, and the website is called torontohuskies.org if you want to visit it. It's kind of old and janky for 2009, but it was interesting that they wanted to change the name to Toronto Huskies. But like you said, now that they won a title, first Canadian team to win an NBA championship, there's no way they're going to change it to the Huskies.
No way.
But as recent as 2013, this is another hockey crossover. Tim Lewicki, who was the former Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment president, said that he would consider a name change. Obviously, this is before the title, but they were close, I think, to becoming the Huskies again, which is pretty cool.
I think he ended up in he's in with the Seattle Kraken now, I think.
There's another, maybe. He's got a brother. So I figured this out when I was looking him up because I wanted to figure out how to pronounce his name. But I think there's a Todd Lewicki. That might be the Raptors guy.
Gotcha.
Sorry, that might be the Kraken guy. So Todd, his younger brother, is currently the chief executive officer and president of the future Seattle Kraken hockey team. Okay. But Tim looks like his current group, I don't know what the Oakview group is, maybe a venture capital group. They have something to do with the season ticket drive or season ticket sales of the Kraken. So he's part of kind of related to the Kraken. But Tim's daughter, so Tim's son-in-law is Troy Bodie, who used to play for the Ducks, and
Sure.
I actually met once at a Ducks game in the press box. A super nice guy.
Oh,
So
cool.
Shout out to Troy Bodie. Nobody cares in this podcast.
Small world.
Yeah, but yeah, small world. But yeah, that's the story of the Toronto Huskies.
Quite a story, and there are a couple connections actually to the team I'm about to talk about. The Baltimore Stallions. Let's go right into it. The Canadian Football League was founded in 1958 with teams based in Canada. So the Grey Cup was what they compete for in the league. That's the championship trophy, and that has some deep roots as well. But I think they started competing for that in like 1909 or something like that. But they're like you talked about. They didn't really get organized like the NBA till about 1958. This league's been around for a very long time, but in an effort to gain a further audience in 1993, the league expanded to the U.S., which hardly anyone knows probably in the U.S., but I'm sure many Canadians remember. They might have forgotten by now.
Did they pick? So you sent me a list of the other teams.
Yeah.
It looks like they specifically picked cities that did not have any NFL franchises, right? Because I'm sure the NFL has some sort of agreement.
Right. Yeah. So the U.S. experiment lasted from about 1993 to 1995. So there were 6 franchises that competed at different times. That included the Sacramento Gold Miners, who moved to San Antonio after 2 years to become the Texans, the Las Vegas Posse, the Shreveport Pirates, which is a tongue twister, the Birmingham Barracudas, the Memphis Mad Dogs, and the Baltimore CFL Colts. They were called originally, and that name would later be changed to the Baltimore Stallions, obviously.
So going back to the team that moved from Sacramento to Texas, was that it?
Yeah.
They were the Texans in the CFL, or they were?
Yes, in the CFL. So they were called the San Antonio Texans, and I believe they lasted 1 year.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear how that. So because the Houston Oilers moved to Tennessee in the NFL, and then then the expansion team in Houston became the Texans in the NFL, but that was like 2000.
Yeah,
something?
that was
way after
this CFL experiment.
But I wonder if the NFL team jacked the CFL name. I mean, Texas.
They had to. It's a pretty great name.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's not super original, but it's also pretty good. I mean,
yeah,
it's the same thing as Canucks or Canadians.
Right. Yankees too.
Yep.
Yeah, so the team in Baltimore was the owner was calling them the Baltimore CFL Colts to start. So basically, none of these U.S. teams besides the Baltimore Stallions were successful at all. They all had financial issues, and as I said, I think the Vegas team lasted like a year out of the 3 years, and there was some other problem, like Shreveport struggled terribly financially. So this team was known, as I said, as the Baltimore CFL Colts. They were owned by Jim Sparrow. The NFL soon actually sued this franchise because of the name. The Indianapolis Colts, who played in Baltimore from 1953 to 1983. So the NFL ended up suing them for this name because they didn't want any confusion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, are you going to be that confused? Like, it's like They don't even play in the same league.
Right. So as I said, the NFL sued the Baltimore CFL franchise, and then the franchise decided obviously not to fight the NFL over the team's name, and they were called the Baltimore Football Club. And then often they were called the Baltimore CFLers too. So this team was nicknamed these two names, but they were also also referred to as a team without a name. This team without a name had a ton of success in their first year, compiling a record in the regular season of 12-6, finishing second in the CFL's East Division. The 12-6 record set a CFL expansion team record. They were led by CFL legend Mike Pringle. He led the team at running back. Pringle was the leading rusher in his first year with the unknown name team.
Do you know what college he went to?
He went to two schools. One was in California. I can't remember the schools, but I know he transferred.
Let's see. He went to.
He was only 5'9". He was a
Cal
little
State
guy.
Fullerton, and then let's see, blah 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 college, Washington State, and then Cal State Fullerton.
Okay, so he ended up at Cal State Fullerton.
And then that's where he finished.
Okay, well, in this year in the CFL, he actually broke a record for rushing with 1,972 yards. So he had a huge year, and this team with no name ended up making the CFL's Grey Cup final, losing just barely 26-23 to the BC Lions in their first year. So really, really successful first year. In the next year, the franchise was still being referred to as the Baltimore Football Club, or a team with no name, basically. And within one week into the season, a fan poll decided that the team would be named the Baltimore Stallions. So I don't really understand why they couldn't figure that out in preseason.
Well, same reason why the Washington, formerly Redskins, are now the Washington Football Club. It's
right.
Who knows? Maybe it was an FU type thing to the league. It's just, you never know. But it's happening now in the NFL, so it's not that crazy.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's good correlation there. Like the 1994 season, the Stallions dominated on the field, finishing with a record of 15-3. The Stallions were led by quarterback Tracy Ham and once again running back Mike Pringle. Pringle, although he didn't rush for as many yards as he did in 94, was named CFL's most outstanding player for that season in 1995. Pringle and the Stallions cruised through the playoffs, making CFL's Grey Cup final, facing off with CFL legend Doug Flutie, as we all know.
Flutie
and the Calgary Stampeders, former Buffalo Bills quarterback. Who else did he play for in the NFL?
Patriots.
Yes.
Early
on.
No. He came back. He was one of Brady's backups. Right around maybe 09, 10, around then. I think it was right after they lost their perfect season, but he kicked a field goal or something. I know I'm getting and Vinny Testaverde confused, but one of the two of them kicked a field goal.
Well, I picture him in a Chargers uniform too.
Yeah, he played for the Chargers, I think.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he had a great football career.
Mm-hmm.
No denying that. I mean, he was great for the Bills. And not so good for the Patriots early in his career. That's probably why he went to the CFL. I'm guessing. You there?
Yeah. Sorry. I don't know much about Flutie's first stint with the Patriots.
Okay.
The Patriots sucked for a long time, so he probably was part of that suckage.
Yeah, I think he was terrible with the Patriots, and that's why he ended up in the Canadian Football League. But anyways, he played for the Calgary Stampeders at that time. As a CFL fan, or if there's any CFL fans out there, the Calgary Stampeders were excellent at that time for that league. So the Stallions outplayed the Stampeders, winning 37-20 to become the first American team to win the Grey Cup. The amazing thing was this team was very popular in Baltimore, and they drew more than 30,000 fans per game in 2 years.
Do you know what factors were part of their popularity? What made them such a big draw?
Well, I think, Baltimore, we've always talked about Baltimore getting an NFL team back. And I think the Colts were very popular when they left, and I'm not sure what the stipulations of them leaving Baltimore in '83, but I think it's always been a football market, and they proved that they wanted football back, at least some sort of football.
Yeah.
Averaging 30,000 fans per game.
Well, the original Baltimore Colts like exit from Baltimore was really controversial because they basically loaded everything up in a truck. I think they kept it secret from fans. There's a very good 30 for 30 about it.
Oh, okay.
Where they basically kept it secret from the fan base. The owner did, loaded everything up into a truck overnight, and they just disappeared to Indianapolis.
83 even. I feel like that would be something done in like 53, but
no, it was a touchy subject, I think, for Baltimore football fans.
Huh. I'll look more into that. That's interesting. So they won this Grey Cup, and they were getting 30,000 fans a game, averaging that, and their celebration was completely short-lived. So this team, as I said, was popular there, and having them there though in Baltimore was unsustainable for a long time. Team to be there because Cleveland Browns owner Art Modell decided to move his franchise to Baltimore. The Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore, which, as we know, was a highly controversial decision at the time. Kind of left Cleveland high and dry. Mm-hmm. But they have a team back, so that's great.
They probably, like Knicks fans, also wish their team they wouldn't have a team back.
Right. Yeah, they definitely have struggled. So hopefully they'll be better this year, but we'll see. So the teams, they had a celebration parade that for winning the Grey Cup, and the announcement was made that the NFL was coming back to Baltimore. So they had about 200 fans at their parade, their victory parade.
Oh, that's sad. But so their success, you were telling me, was part of the reason why the NFL thought they could come back to Baltimore, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I think that, they were seeing these large crowds, and like there was a hunger for, another sport besides baseball in the Baltimore area. And it's proven to be a good, match for the NFL and, the Baltimore Ravens in the city.
And the timing was actually pretty good because now that you mentioned baseball, the strike was in '94, right? There was no baseball. Their baseball season was canceled. So I imagine that was helpful for the Stallions to get more fans. And I mean, probably helpful for the NFL overall to kind of really flip the switch and become that league that basically America's sport now, not baseball.
Right.
So yeah, that's interesting. Good timing for them, I guess.
Right. And, but it wasn't such good timing for the Stallions franchise. So they ended up moving to Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and were named the Montreal Alouettes.
Oh, just like from the Huskies story.
I told you there was a tie-in.
Yeah, I wonder
if tie-ins.
So they probably adopted the name. That's pretty cool.
Right, yeah. So a lot of the players, including Mike Pringle, ended up moving with the franchise, and he went on to become, as I said, a CFL legend. So
did he ever make the NFL?
I think he was on a couple practice squads. Like he had the opportunities, but just didn't pan out for him. He's a well-known name in Canada now, so I think he did pretty well for himself. Yeah,
and speaking of practice squads and breaking into the NFL and all that stuff, I'm looking up Doug Flutie. He never played. I forgot about this. He never played for the No, he did play for the Patriots, 87 to 89, but he, before that, played for a USFL team called the New Jersey Generals. Then he played for the Bears. Then he played for the Patriots, and then he went to the CFL.
Wow.
And then he went, let's see.
What a career.
Yeah, 96, 97 was his last year, or 97 was his last year in Toronto. And then he went Bills for 2 years, Chargers for 3 years, Patriots for a year. So, so he was there. He was with the Patriots in 05, so he must have won a Super Bowl with them. We're getting off track now, but
yes, we are. No, but yeah, Flutie was, obviously had a great career, but he definitely played. Well, he played in three different leagues. You said USFL or whatever it was called.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he definitely made some stops in his career.
Yeah.
Getting back to the Stallions, as I said, they moved to Montreal and were renamed the Alouettes. Before they left Baltimore, the fan sport just diminished. So, it was just not a market for two football teams. But one thing that was pretty cool when they were there, the 2 years, the Stallions averaged, in 1994, they averaged 37,447 fans a game, which for that year was first in the CFL. And then in 95, the attendance dipped a little bit, but they were second in the league.
Damn.
So yeah, they were very popular there. So it was pretty cool.
Talk about taking over, like joining the Canadian Football League as an American team, and all of a sudden the second most popular team in the league. That's pretty hefty.
It just shows you how popular football is in some markets, and basically every market in the U.S. And you got to remember, these fans were coming out. The Canadian Football League has different rules, so these fans were, in a way, watching a different game.
Yeah, got to give them credit too. They just wanted football,
right? So the franchise in Baltimore, the CFL franchise in Baltimore, was obviously short-lived, but they did have a regular season record of 27-9, along with 2 Grey Cup appearances in 2 years. I mean,
good.
Kind of a model franchise for lasting 2 years.
Yeah, and probably one of the best expansion teams in any sport. I mean,
right? It has to be.
Yeah, that's
Vegas Golden Knights, maybe.
Yeah. Yep, that's basically the hockey equivalent. Although they never won a championship, never. They're still in existence, and they're only 3 seasons old. So, might win this year. We'll see.
Yep, and then my sources included. There was a great article called "25 Years Ago, the Baltimore Stallions Ruled the CFL," and it was by I couldn't find the author, but it says by the Associated Press.
Oh yeah, AP Wire.
Yep. And then my other source was CFL Facts, Figures, Records from 94, 96, and 98.
Awesome. Well, that's a great story. Definitely going to continue this podcast, and it just gives us ideas. Like, we cover so many teams, from like USFL teams to WHA teams to just really everything. There's so many disappeared, you'll call them, or no longer in existence professional sports franchises that tune in for many more episodes.
Right. And like Anthony was saying, there's so many teams in the current landscape that have connections to teams that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's one of the more interesting things, I think, that's fun to talk about. Andrew, you got anything you're working on? Anything coming up? You want to promote anything?
Nothing I'm currently working on right now. I do write on a weekly basis for a daily fantasy sports website called Roto Baller.
Awesome. And what sports do you cover on that?
I'm just covering hockey currently.
There you go. So if you want any daily fantasy advice, check out Andrew's articles on Roto Baller. And I'm just still writing for the Hockey Writers. I'm appearing every so often on Totally Offsides podcast, which is an Anaheim Ducks podcast. And you can check out my blog. I'll post some blog posts on occasion on theplaymakerblog.com. But yeah, and you can find me at Deli Tweets. It's DELLITWEETS. And Andrew, what's your Twitter handle?
At AWLENN.
Sounds good. All right, guys. Till next episode. Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thank you. Have a great night.